Okay, people are loading in. Perfect. We'll give that a moment. Welcome, everybody.
Hello. All right.
Let's
Just
see
give
here. I
people a
think,
moment to load.
yeah, people are still loading in right now, so we'll just wait for that to top out. Let's see here. Um, all right, I think we are starting to top out, so people are filtering in. That's perfect. So we'll get things kicked off here. So for those who may be new to the series, this is our second one. I think if I ask nicely here, someone will probably magically post the original session in the chat, and you guys can refer to that anytime you want. Uh, quick housekeeping thing. The webinar chat should be available to be able to chat to anyone and everyone. If you don't mind, keep that for, banter and hellos and all the fun stuff. If you have questions you want to make sure they get answered, use the Q&A. I'll be following through on those. And then we'll be getting Sai to answer the questions through the Q&A as we go along with the presentation here. So with that said, Sai, I'll let you introduce yourself and we can jump right in.
Yeah. Hi. Hello again. Um, we're going over the application deployment of Intune. My name's Sai. Started with Augmentt here in November. I have 12 years of MSP experience, 4 years focusing on cybersecurity. Enjoy board games and escape rooms. Intune is kind of a big thing that I've dived into, so I'm here to share my experience with you. The focus here is going to be applications. So we have a couple things to cover today. We're just going to go over the different types of application types, the Intune company portal, line of business apps, the Intune Win app utility, tools and resources you can use to deploy applications. So Intune applications, you've set up Intune if you've joined the first webinar and you have some basic setups. The next thing to really get the most out of Intune is deploying applications. Most real world scenarios, you have an existing RMM and other kind of software that you want to deploy to your company and clients. So Intune's a great tool to do that. It's a native way that's already installed on the machine. You can kind of package your installers and push it out through Intune. There's various ways to do that. Some additional benefits is you can have application version control. Perhaps a department needs a specific version of an application. You can use Intune to specify that version and then make sure no other versions are installed. You can also supersede versions. You can have varied versions by department. You control out the security groups, essentially various different application deployments assigned divisions, superior, wow, different security groups. You can utilize dynamic groups to make that more automated as well. A good feature that can come up from this too is not just deploying applications, but removing unwanted applications. I'm sure you guys have seen this in out-of-box experiences. There's like a McAfee agent that deploys or bloatware that installs. You can actually utilize Intune to remove that software from the machine so that it's not there. And like we covered a little bit, there's different types of ways to deploy Intune. You can also, sorry, applications, including the Microsoft Store, the Intune company portal, and as well as custom scripts and installers. So let's get into it. We'll start with the Intune company portal. So the Intune company portal is Microsoft's answer to you having your own kind of hub for applications that you can have the users manage themselves. What it looks like is this. So it's a tool that you deploy through Intune. It's a Microsoft Store. It's an install. You can manually install it. You can push it through Intune. I'll show you here in a moment. But what the end user sees is they launch this thing called Company Portal. They removed the Intune from the application name, I think, last year or so. So you can have your own branding, so it'll have your icon at the top. You can specify applications that are available in the company portal. And what's nice about this is the end user can install these applications. Not only that, but if they're having issues or need to troubleshoot, they can also uninstall and reinstall that application as well. They can update their own software through here. You can obviously push this automatically, but there might be some software that are optional. Maybe some people you want to have Spotify on their machine, or only some people need PowerPoint, or various applications. You can control that through here. The help and support tab, you can also specify information for like your help desk information, perhaps information on how to reach out to your help desk, phone number, email. I'm not going to go into that in ours because it has our own information here, but it's a very useful tool. You can also go to devices, see your devices. You can see when it checked in. Checking in is important for the Intune policies of when it applies. And if you go into here, you get more information, and you can go in and reset your PIN, rename it, reset the machine if you have access to. Resetting the machine will wipe it and get it back to out-of-box experience. In some cases, that might be useful for end users who they've reached a critical error in the machine. If they're Intune enrolled, they can reset the machine to wipe it. Once it's wiped, as long as they connect to internet, they can just redeploy Intune. So it's very handy to help people, self troubleshoot. Yeah. And so we'll go into how you deploy that. So we're going to go to the Intune company portal. And Intune at intune.microsoft.com, we'll navigate to devices, sorry, apps, Windows. Here is different applications. You'll simply hit create. And so there's two parts to the company portal. First is deploying the company portal, which I mentioned you do through the Store app. So you just select the Microsoft Store app. You'll hit select. It kind of navigates you to a place you can search for the Store app. So company portal is what we search for. When we get the Intune company portal, Microsoft Corporation, you'll hit select. You get to specify some information if you want user or system-based installation. You can show it as a featured app. We'll go into the featured app here shortly. Essentially, in the company portal, there's an option to have featured apps. They'll just kind of show up at the front as like a favorite. You can select the logo. Because it's a company portal, it's not really important to specify information because you need the company portal to access this information, so it's kind of redundant. You then choose which devices you want to assign for. Typically, the company portal, if you're going to be deploying it, you might as well just add it to all devices. So you can choose add all devices. You can choose if you have only specific Intune group, you can choose that group like we mentioned before. Whatever group you want, you can assign it there, or all users. Once you've decided what you want, you just hit review and save. And again, you can create stuff without applications if you're just testing and then add certain users and then go back in and modify it later after the fact if you want to extend it more. Just modify assignments and then change that as you see fit. It's pretty simple. That's how you deploy a company portal. By default, there's nothing in the company portal. We'll kind of get into that with the next steps of how you deploy applications and make it available in the company portal. That being said, we're going to go to line of business applications. These are the more common type of applications that you're going to have installed. They include, if you're using mobile device management for Intune, you can deploy Android or iOS packages. That's for Android phones and iPhones, of course, as well as Mac OS and Windows applications. These are the application types that are supported with line of business applications. So for Windows, it's MSIs, most common ones, and then MSIs. I'll go through that here. Most deployments typically are going to be MSIs. There are obviously .exe installations, which are a little bit trickier. We'll cover that down the road with the Intune Win app. So for the example I have here, we have some existing ones, but I'll just go through a new setup. So we'll do a Zoom deployment. It's a common application we have. So the first thing you need to do for the installation of a MSI app is you need to have an MSI application. So for that, I simply go to Zoom. I would download their MSI tool, and you can do that from zoom.us download admin. Just download the MSI. Once that's downloaded, you have it in your installer folder. We will go through, hit create, select app type, line of business app, hit select. You select the app package file. We'll go ahead and select that MSI we just downloaded. I pre-downloaded it, so I don't want to download again. We'll hit OK. You can rename it. So I'll just do Zoom. You can put a description if you want to. You can do so you know later. Publisher name. You can choose the context if it's per user or per device. This is kind of important. We covered a little bit in the last meeting, but you can have device installations, which means if you have a device assigned to the group, it'll push to the device. So it's installed as the device. For user, it's kind of useful because if, like we talked about before, if you wipe a machine and the user signs back in, any user application context will reinstall whatever device they sign into. So it's pretty handy for user application deployment. If you have any user signing to your laptop, whatever the applications are assigned to that user will reinstall on sign in, which is nice. So command line arguments, this is the same as if you're installing an MSI. You just go through and you can pull that through various applications, such as the Zoom has pretty good documentation on this. We already have one. I'm going to kind of reference that. Uh, so these are like the same command lines you need for MSI execution. I'll just redo it here. You do the full command. This does need to match the file name that you uploaded, which you can see here. If you forgot which one it was, it's going to be that same type. We're doing the quiet installation, no restart. Zoom has its own commands here. In this case, it removes the Google background audio auto adjust. It just automatically sets the default audio, which the users can change. Auto update true. This is a legacy option for Zoom as a heads up. I think Zoom no longer supports this, but you can force it in. I think that they got that because there were some people complaining about it, just basically auto updating in the middle of meetings or calls, which is frustrating. This helps with that. Essentially, it removes the ability for Zoom to be able to control when the machine restarts or when the MSI installation happens. So essentially, it'll only update once they've closed the application. So use it at your own risk. You have the option of ignoring the app version. If you're doing an installation of MSI where it is auto updating, you do want to enable that option. The reason for that is if you don't and the version updates, it will become non-compliant. Intune will register like, well, you have this version here, whatever you initially installed, but if you update it, it's no longer the same version, so it sees it as kind of a drift. And there's a couple things that happen. Either it'll one try to reinstall it to enforce that, or two just marks it non-compliant. Um, so for auto updates, you'd want to ignore the app version. For static ones, if you have to have specific like settings for app accounting, you did like QuickBooks specific version, then you do want ignore app version set to no, in which case it's going to check for that specific version and make sure that's installed. If you want to, you can utilize categories to organize your applications. So in this case, this would probably be a business or social. It's up to you guys. It's more for your own organization. We covered the featured app. If we want it featured, it'll be showing up in the company portal as like a favorite application. You don't have to do that. These are all optional fields that you can put in, and you can select a logo if you want to. That's mostly for the company portal. When you see it there, you saw ours didn't have a lot of logos. You can customize those and show them there. We'll hit next. Here's where you assign the groups. Again, you can choose all devices, all users, or specific groups. Perhaps you only have Zoom for a specific department, in which case you would just select that department. This is the part that's important, the available for enrolled devices. This is if you want it to show up in the company portal, you would add it to this section here. That means in the required section, it'll automatically push it to the device. It'll just automatically install when the device checks in to whatever groups are assigned. If you have it available for enrolled device, it will actually not install, even if you put it in required. It will only be an optional installation that the end user has to do through the company portal. So it's a key distinction that's important to know is if you have it here, automatic deployment. If you have it here, optional. If you have it in both, it's still going to be optional. I've had that kind of confusion happen before, so good caveat to have. Now, that being said, you could have different groups assigned. So you could have like maybe group one is required and they get automatic. Group two, group three, optional. That's totally fine. Group one will still get the automatic deployment. Group two and three will have the optional deployment. So that's the way you can control that. But if the same group is in both, it will only be optional. You would select that, you review, you create. We'll not create it because we already have one. It does take a minute to upload. What'll happen is up here you'll get a notification. Windows, Microsoft is going to upload your MSI that you've uploaded to your own repository. You don't really have access to it, but it's kind of like a signed place where your installers live in the Microsoft environment. And once it's finished, that application will be available and start deploying. If you decide later on, okay, I need a different installer for this, you can go in, edit the app information, and change the file that you want to upload. Like, okay, this new version of the app that I actually want to deploy, let's do this and save. Key thing to note is if you're doing that, it's going to go through the same thing like we talked about. It's going to start uploading. You'll see that notification. Once it's ready, it'll start deploying. A caveat of doing it this way is it's going to reinstall on the devices, so it's kind of disruptive to do it that way. So just keep that in mind, depending on the type of application you have. Um, and that's kind of line of business. The same thing happens for the other packages, files, MSI. MSI is pretty simple. If you have the command lines, it's pretty straightforward. Let's move on. Next, we have the Intune WinApp utility. This one is the complicated one, in my opinion, but more fun. So this one, Microsoft's answer to deploying non-standard installers, typically exe files. They came up with this tool, Intune WinApp utility. You can use it for various methods. You can also package installers. So like if you want to reference multiple installations, you can bundle them into a little utility thing and deploy it through Intune. Another PowerShell is this way. So I'll show you what that looks like. So the Intune WinApp utility, let me find it here. Microsoft has its own repository for it where you install it. So this is Microsoft's website, Microsoft Learn. That's where you can find a lot of ways of how to upload it. It gives you the tool. The tool is essentially here in this GitHub repository. You would go ahead and download it, select the tool, download. We already have one, so we'll just dump into it. So the way this tool works, it's actually just, it runs. It's an application. It's not an install. You essentially, to keep things clean, the best way to do it is you create a folder for the deployment that you want to have. So in our example, we're going to deploy the Augmentt Discover tool. It's an exe. You can do the same process with any exe. So, uh, if you decided to deploy Zoom, the exe version, you could do it this way. Contain it to one folder. In this case, we have Intune app deployment. I've preloaded our discovery agent for our test environment in here. It's an exe file. And so we're going to go ahead and run the WinApp utility. When you run this tool, it brings up a command prompt. It's going to ask you to specify the source folder. In our case, it's going to be this folder here. I'm just going to copy that, paste, and here. It's going to ask you to specify the setup file. So you can either just copy just that, or you can, I'm kind of like a stickler and just do the full path. Then it's going to ask you to specify the output folder. Essentially what happens, it's going to look at this whole folder. Anything in this folder, it's going to package. So if I had reference files, maybe the exe references something else. Maybe it's something else that gets referenced. All that gets booked into kind of like imagine a zip file. You can specify output folder. What's going to happen? It's going to like package all that into one little thing, and it's going to ask you where do you want it. I'm going to put it in the same folder. You don't have to. You can put it anywhere else you want to. And then please specify if you want a catalog folder. By default, your answer is going to be no here. The only time you really use catalog folders is if you're using Windows 10 S mode. It's not really popular, but essentially it's a version of Windows 10 where it's like kind of streamlined, where they only have like, imagine like a kiosk lockdown version that's only Edge and such. Um, in our case, we're not going to really get into that. So by default, most of the time, your answer is going to be no here. You'll select no, hit enter. It goes through and it packages all of this stuff, and it creates this nice little Intune Win file. That's what we need for the next step here, which is and you go to create, you'll select the Windows app 32. And again, if you click this, that takes you to that link we just saw, the Intune 32 app management, and going into that. I'll hit select. It's going to ask you to select your app package file. We'll go through, we'll select that app package file, hit open, hit OK. Now we get to specify, oops, the same thing as before. So you can name it. So we'll just say Discover, in this case, Augmentt. You can choose to enter the app version if you want to. So the MSI auto detects a lot of this stuff. With this, you have to put in a lot of stuff because it doesn't know. Um, we're going to opt out of the app version. It's not a required field. And then you choose installer commands here. 1 second. So you would choose what the install commands are. We have pretty good documentation on this. I think I lost my window. 1 moment.
Is there a pretty typical way of finding install commands, or are you just hoping that the vendor of the software has provided them, or
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to do this. Um, most standard MSI installers work with EXEs, but typically it's the vendor specific. Like I've had to go through in a lot of different ways of in some cases they have in the exe files you can actually find a help command where it has all the different commands. That's where I've gone through it. Typically this is more complicated. A lot of times it's also just an exe is just an MSI bundled in there. So one option that people talk about is the you can actually, if you run an exe temporarily, if it's one of those package one, it will load an MSI onto your machine. You can actually go to your directory to find that MSI and you can extract that one. But if it's running an MSI in that sense, then it will have the same MSI install commands will work. It
okay,
just won't check it for uh, the MSI deployment of Intune. So here we go through. Sorry, I found the commands. So in our case, we have so same thing here. We have like very silent. That's the most common one with EXEs. And we have this document in ours. Here you would specify the license key for the discovery agent. A lot of different specific installations will have their own unique stuff. If you're doing like an RMM installation, for example, you may have to specify that. You do need an uninstall command. Uh, Basically referencing where the uninstall is on the machine once it's been installed is all you need to find. Same commands that work for the installation usually works for the uninstallation. You can choose how much time is required for the before it times out. By default, it goes to an hour. You can specify shorter if you want to. That just gives you better reporting on like if it's in progress. Once it deploys, it won't update for an hour. If you choose a shorter time period, it'll like update and check again, and if it's not, it'll push it again. I'll allow available uninstall. This is similar to the company portal. So if you allow the uninstall from the company portal, they can uninstall the application if they want to. In this case, because we don't want them to uninstall this application, we can remove that option. If it's a tool that we want to have on the system, we would choose system as opposed to user. Again, that's user-based context. This is how you specify if you want, like, maybe there's applications you want users to have, and maybe it's optional. You could do that. If you want an enforced thing like an RMM, an EDR, or like an agent like this, we would choose system and unavailable to uninstall. You can
is there
choose.
a good strategy for? I know a lot of RMM tools out there. For example, if you were deploying them, or just MSP tools in general, will have similar to us a license key of sorts per tenant in order to identify them. Is there a pretty good strategy to manage that through Intune?
Yeah. So when you're deploying the applications, typically those RMMs will have their own MSI command, and essentially it's a registry edit to reference the key. So when you're installing it here, you're just going to put that key in the installation command. Um, you'll have a specific one for each version. In some cases, the RMM will actually develop a custom installer, or there's either a white box installer where it's a generic installer and you specify the commands to associate with the right tenant, or they have custom installers for the specific tenant. Uh, the better option I find for Intune is to get the generic one and then use the commands. That way you're not having to create a new MSI or EXE every time you have a new client or tenant, and then just
Okay.
modifying the command here. So yeah, it's pretty because you'll have
Similar
exactly
to this one.
yeah, yeah. Just basically just the one value variable changes with the RMMs installations that I've seen in the past.
So no options as far as we know from like variables that you could save in a tenant and be automatically referenced here.
Not in the Microsoft tenant, no. Unfortunately
Okay.
not. It's not that intuitive with Microsoft. It doesn't know what you're mostly because there's so many different types of versions you can have for RMMs, so it can't really doesn't really want to, I think. It's Microsoft's answer. Um, and you can choose the device restart behavior if you want to allow the app to restart the device or not, or determine based on different stuff. No specific action, we'll just do whatever. It's up to you. Uh, these are standard codes. If your application has specific codes that have different error types, you can add those in, but these are the default Windows ones that generate. Um, requirements, you can choose prerequisites for this to install. Maybe you can specify the apps, the systems that can happen, like only 64-bit systems or any system. You can choose a minimum OS version. Like maybe we only want Windows 11 devices that are up to date. You can choose how much disk space is required. If you know it's going to be a big install, maybe you do like, hey, before you do install this, make sure there's like 10 gigs of space available. Um, uh, Same thing with this is RAM. How much RAM is available for this? Like, okay, I know this needs 12 gigs of RAM, so we have to make sure we have like at least 16,000, like 16, and this is in megabytes, so at least that much available for it to run. Same thing with CPU, you can choose that. You can also leave these blank. You don't have to specify these, but if you have specific requirements, then that's important. You do need to specify minimum OS version. So if not, if you want it everywhere, you can choose the oldest version if you want to. That's up to you. There might be some applications that need a specific OS version to run. That's why this is important. And then you can also add additional requirements if you want to. So you can specify what kind of requirement you want, like maybe a registry, like of okay, it has to have this value, it has to have this script, it has to have this file. You can check those variables. And in some cases, one option we'll get into is supersedence and dependencies. Basically, I'll just get to it actually. You specify this, you do detection rules. So with the MSI, Microsoft knows when an MSI is installed because it's an MSI, it's packaged in a way. With this package, it doesn't know what you're pushing. It doesn't know what is in the package. It just helps you package it, and it's kind of like it's relying on you to give it all the input, as we did like the install, the uninstall commands. Now, how do we know if it successfully deploys? You get to specify. So you can configure a detection rule. Maybe it's a registry edit. Maybe it's a file. Maybe it's like so like, okay, if we were going to install this, we want to make sure that, okay, there should be now a folder that's called discovery under the applications or users directory. I'm not sure if that's the case here, but whatever your application is deploying, you get to specify if it's a file or folder, and file or folder exists, or you can check for the size. You would know based on the application what you're looking for, and so you can specify all that here. And then yeah, you can have multiple detection rules if you want to. So if we did this, we can also like, okay, we need to check for this or check for this other variable because maybe it installs in different contexts based on a 64-bit system or a 32-bit system. You do need to have some sort of detection rule in place. Let's do test. Um, and then dependencies. So dependencies let's say I have a tool that I want to install, but in order for it to work, it needs to have another tool installed. You can set up, okay, for this to work, I need this other tool to be installed. Let's see, I guess you have to have it pre-existing, but you would specify like software A package has to be installed before software B. So in order for this one to work, you need to have that other one installed. It's not required, but it is important if you're doing a phase like a big chunk rollout, like okay, this application needs this one to work. And then similarly, you can have supersedence. So um if you're going to replace an app, you can have this installed. So like maybe someone has Adobe Reader and then you're deploying Adobe Acrobat Pro. You want to replace Adobe Reader to avoid conflict. You can specify that here. You would choose that Adobe Reader application to supersede that application. So it's a replacement. This happens in a lot of cases, like maybe you're having a new version out, maybe you're having a pro versus non-pro version. Um, there's a lot of different ways to that, but you have that kind of control with these. Again, optional, you don't have to do anything there. There's just extra granularity controls that you have.
Quick question that popped up here.
Sure.
Um, so for the detection rules, someone asked if a typical vendor might be able to help with that. So I guess I'll just rely on your experience of having deployed a lot of this stuff and dealt with different vendors from both the MSP space and probably outside of it, right? Like things like Adobe and other solutions. How have you found assistance when it comes to this? Would RMM providers typically have good instructions on this?
Yeah, so a lot of times now, especially with Intune gaining popularity, a lot of vendors have actually created Intune specific deployments. Like Adobe has like their own guide on how to deploy Intune and package it, which is nice. I've done that before. Figuring it out before Adobe had it was a bear of a time. But there's a couple ways. Like one, as an IT provider, I was able to know like, okay, it's already I know that this folder didn't exist. And so you can reach out to the vendor. I've had vendor support, like software vendors, be like, "Hey, what would be a good way for me to detect if this application installed successfully?" They're very intuitive, like they know their product better than, I would, I imagine. So they can give you kind of like, "Well, it's going to create this registry key at this location. If it didn't, then it didn't install." So the registry key is really, in my opinion, the best option for detecting an installation successful. I've done file a folder that works really well as well, but sometimes an installation gets interrupted halfway through and it deploys the folder, but then gets stuck somewhere else. So sometimes
Mm.
you'll get false positives. So be careful what you reference for the file. I've had it where someone just checked for like the Adobe folder, for example, when deploying Acrobat. However, if Adobe Reader is installed on the machine, then it also has an Adobe folder. So be careful with how you pick those specific criterias, because then if it detects it as already installed with this, it's not going to push the installation. So in that scenario, if I have Adobe, a folder called Adobe, and I'm trying to push Pro through this, it's not going to ever deploy because it's already detecting as installed based on that criteria. But yeah, reaching out to vendor support should get you more specific information. Uh, and then in some cases, if they're not very useful, I've had a couple like legacy softwares that I've had to deploy where they don't have support anymore, but the application is still needed for some reason. And so while evaluating replacements, deploying that option, it's been a lot of me deploying it installing it on a VM myself, looking at what changed, and then figuring out what is a good anchor. Not the best method typically, but sometimes you make do with what you have.
My takeaway from this is, don't call one of the main vendors in the space and say, "Hey, what should my Intune app detection rules be?" I think that most companies, especially in our space, like there aren't many that have dove into Intune specifically yet, right? So they won't know the answer. They won't know what you're referring to. Just go in and say, what are the criteria to know that the app was installed? And then you have to infer the test basically, or um, that you're putting in here as a rule from that. If you're trying to come in from a Intune question angle, most tools in our space aren't dealing with Intune, right? There's a handful of them. That's why we're the first ones in the space.
That's correct. Yeah. They'll, yeah, typically getting the registry or the file locations of verifying what executable or application is supposed to deploy. or registry method that will show a successful installation. The vendors will have that information, but I've had it before. I've reached out for Intune specific questions and they've thrown their hands up at the first set of Intune. It's like we don't know what that is. That's on
Yeah,
you.
they think it's black magic. So if you just ask the generic question, they'll be like, "Oh yeah, no, this registry key," and you'll be like, "I know how to do that."
Yeah. Yeah, and the registry one's pretty easy. Same thing, you find the key path, you put the value name, and then key exists, key does not exist. You can compare. You get very granular. A lot of times just key exists is totally sufficient. In the case, sometimes there's issues where you want to have specific versions, the other ones come in handy. And then yeah, again, similar assignments. Same thing applies. You can choose a group. Required means it'll automatically deploy. Available means it'll show up in the company portal. And then again, if you have it in both places, the same group, it'll only be optional. So make sure that if you want it to be forced out, it's only in required. And then if you want it optional for other groups, you can do that here. Then you review and create. And then similarly as before, it's going to go ahead and upload it. And it's going to take some time to upload. You'll see a progress bar uploading a Augmentt Discover. It gives you percentage, and then it's ready to go. It will go ahead and push that out. If you have any issues with application deployments, you can review that here. You would go to apps. You would find the application that you want. Um, by default, we're not deploying anything. It'll give you kind of a quick status window of what's installed. If you click into it, it'll get you more information. If you had failures, you can click into it, see why it failed. You can get information like the app version. It does take some time to update. Some key things to note when you're deploying a Intune Win app utility is a lot of times it may show failure or error until the device restarts. Sometimes, depending on your key detections, those don't generate properly until the device restarts once. So don't always jump to it failed. Sometimes it successfully deploys and shows an error until a reboot happens. Yeah, that's Intune Win App. The other cool use cases for Intune Win App, like I mentioned, you can package things. Maybe you have a custom installation. You can deploy PowerShell scripts through the Intune Win app. So similar process. I don't have a PowerShell script handy, but there are some cool ones that you can do. Essentially, in the app, you would just have a PowerShell script in the folder. So we'd create like a new folder. You would create a PowerShell script in here. And if you want the PowerShell script to reference other things, in some scenarios, what I've done is I've actually deployed printer drivers through this method. So you create a PowerShell script that loads the drivers. You would keep the driver files, like the cab file and the reference file in here. And then you would have that PowerShell script reference those in the same directory. Once everything is working, you have a PowerShell script, you test it locally, and everything works. You can then use the Intune Win app to package that PowerShell script and then deploy that in here. Once you have the deployment here, you would just reference the PowerShell script and whatever commands you have, the same way you do the executable. You would just specify the PowerShell, like run the PowerShell. The PowerShell has the commands. That I found is like pretty much the go-to. If I can't deploy it any other way, my fail-proof method has always been PowerShell, going back to PowerShell and deploying it that way. And if we want, maybe in a future session, we can build one out together and go through that process. But I find that's kind of been like my go-to. Typically, I haven't really run into an issue where I haven't been able to deploy an application through Intune. I've been in environments where I've had to use RMM most of the time, but once a client got Intune, we used both, like co-managed through Intune and RMM. Some things that are beneficial with RMM versus Intune. Intune, you don't get to control when the applications deploy. It just deploys when the Windows checks in, which is on sign in or every couple hours. With the RMM, obviously, you can schedule, usually there's scheduling capabilities. So Intune's nice because you can have a great out of box experience with the applications. Person signs in, they load it up, it deploys. Maybe you have some stuff you want to deploy through RMM. You can deploy the RMM through Intune and use that as your main application manager. That's an option you have available as well. So a lot of flexibility here for sure.
So someone asked if we can install remote access software. So I'm assuming that's just generic, like any of the remote access tools out there. So I'd say the answer to that would be yes. And then the question is, can you find assistance from the manufacturer of that software for just getting the right set of command lines, which should be completely possible.
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely deployed Screen Connect before is the most common one. Usually, like when I was in an MSP, the two installations we would have right off the bat when we got an Intune client is our RMM and then our remote software like Screen Connect. And then we would determine which applications the client needed, also 365 apps, which we covered last session. And then we would determine if it made more sense to play it through the RMM or through Intune. In most cases, the value add for the client is Intune, mostly because whether they stay with us as a provider or not, that's something that we've built out for them, they own and they keep forever. Whereas the RMM, there's dependency on, you providing that software and stuff, but more granular control is important for more complicated installations. But yeah, remote control software is definitely allowed and applicable. MSI is the easiest. EXE is available through Intune app. And yes, the vendor usually provides installation commands because they know a lot of people, especially for remote Connect software, they're pretty on top of getting you a silent install command lines, and those will work for sure.
So a couple of questions are popping in. So one of them is, will we have a webinar on CA policies and application protection? And I said, absolutely. CA policies, I think, is uh, in the next one in 2 weeks. And then app protection policies, I think if we have time in the same one, but otherwise we'll keep going on the series as long as you guys want to know stuff. Will you have a webinar on reporting? Sure, why not? We'll keep adding stuff as long as you guys think it's valuable. Uh, can this be done today via Augmentt today without any upgrades? Is a good question. So I can touch on Augmentt in a quick second here. We did go through the current capabilities of Augmentt in the first webinar, but if anyone wants to stick around in a moment, I'll be happy to show what's available today. There was a question early on, and I kept it for the end. So David, we didn't forget about you. Um, the question is, to what degree can Intune eliminate the need for an RMM? So I posted that question in the chat actually because I also feel like I don't have all the answers here. If anyone didn't catch that, feel free to answer to give David some insights. I do have some high level thoughts on it as well. So, there's a lot of things that the RMM has never done well, which may not be 100% Intune related, but just generically when you're using Microsoft 365, which has users and devices, like the RMM has never been good on the user entity, which is where the M365 ecosystem comes in. From an Intune perspective, I think as device networking, internet speed, that kind of stuff, uh, monitoring those kinds of things is a lot less needed nowadays, which is a lot of what the RMM focused on back in the day. I think you'll be able to migrate a lot of that stuff to Intune. Um, I think you'll always need your email AV endpoint security unless you're leveraging it through Defender. Um, like asset inventory and all that, I think Intune will be able to take care of a lot of that for you moving forward, especially as you need probably less on-prem stuff as that migrates over to, SaaS tools. So I think, and then you've got like a lot of things that the RMM provided was a lot of your scripting and monitoring, and a lot of that can be done. And we covered some of that in the first session if you want to check it out. But through your compliance monitoring, once you set up your device configurations and your compliance monitoring, I think that a lot of that can be caught there, and then we can do app scripting and patching. So uh, running your scripts that will clean up, things like you used to do on the RMM. I think again, most of that is possible. So there's still gaps. I think one of the biggest gaps will be your remote control tools and the kind of backend uh, access that gives you typically in those tools. That's my take on it. I'm curious if anyone's got different takes and put them in the chat for David and others to check out. What's your take, Sai?
Yeah, so we value that in depth because Intune became more popular. So for some clients, Intune removed the need for RMM because it does a lot of what they need. There are a lot of gaps. For example, scripts was one that was like you can use the Intune Win app to deploy scripts, but again, you don't get to control when those scripts deploy, timing wise. Like if you want to go at 5 p.m., not possible through Intune. So the RMM gives you that granular control. There's also native script deployment through Intune. And the way scripts works is actually deploy scripts before it deploys applications. So if you have a PowerShell script through the Intune Win app and then a script from the native Intune, the Intune script will run before the app one. However, the script will only run once. So it runs when the user signs in, and then it will not run again unless the script changes or is a new one is added. But the same script will not run recurringly. So if you're using a script for like making something compliant, it's only going to run the one time. It's not going to be effective for like a continual like drift monitoring. So the compliance report of Intune is great to tell you when things fall out of sync. And the application and configuration policies can enforce those for sure, typically faster than the RMM sometimes. The other benefit too is if a user wipes their machine, the RMM is removed in most, like 99% of the cases, and then it no longer is useful. You have to reintegrate the RMM in order for that to be useful. Whereas with Intune, because you wipe the machine and it's managed, when they start that machine back up, it will be enrolled in Intune and they have to sign back in, and it'll just automatically deploy the RMM or whatever tools again. So it's kind of useful in that sense. If you have a higher license of Microsoft, Microsoft is kind of empowering Intune to allow remote access and some backend support. They're trying to kind of compete with the RMM, it sounds like. But a lot of the granular control is still going to be better in the RMM, mostly the ability to schedule application installations or script restarts and stuff like that. That's been the biggest difference I saw with the RMM versus Intune. But in most cases, whenever an application deployment came about, I would try to do an Intune first. I think it's more um, intuitive. But for some applications where it's more complicated, the RMM just gives you more flexibility of uninstall X and then install this. But Intune is getting in that way. Like you can make sure, like I said, the precedents and supersedents, you can have those kind of lines of methodology in there. But it's getting there, but I don't think it's I think you still typically an RMM would get you more bang for your buck with the granular control for sure.
Awesome. I'll take over the screen sharing. Again, these sessions are meant to be value add. We have another one in 2 weeks. Feel free to check the recording from the one we just did 2 weeks ago as well. Of course, every time we do these, a lot of people ask us, what part does Augmentt fulfill here? So I'm just going to take over the screen share and jump into a quick demo of Augmentt, specifically around the Intune portion. So it should note that we're on an Intune journey, so we're still building this out. So what we can currently do on Intune is your device configuration and compliance policies. Under device configuration, if you're looking at the Intune portal, right, you've got your admin templates, your device configuration templates, and then you can go to the other section under devices and have your configuration settings there. Those are all rolled into a single UI for us to keep things consistent, so you can see them over here. Um, and then your compliance templates will be again available within that same single place. And from an onboarding perspective, typically for that out-of-box experience, you've got your deployment profiles. So the way Augmentt works is we have a bunch of out-of-box best practices, mostly created by Sai here, aligned to CIS currently. And so you can use those to kind of get things going out of the box if you need some, help and recommendations on getting that rolled out easily. If you've got any kind of device configurations or compliances already configured in any of your environments, you just load them up in Augmentt. So you basically create a new template uh, and store things you've already configured that work well for you. Then you baseline them, which means grouping a bunch of them together, and you can roll them out in one go. So that is the value of using Augmentt and being able to take the pieces that you have from any tenant, put them together, and then start consistently deploying them to all your tenants, onboarding new tenants with them, so on and so forth. And from a roadmap perspective, we're continuing to build this out. So right now, our focus is going to be iOS MDM based on demand. We'll be adding the apps and scripts portion that we just talked about. So you'll be able to take an app that you took the time to, set up as Sai was just showing, and then simply replicate it across other tenants, probably just edit something like your license key and push out with all the same configuration so you don't have to go in each tenant and recreate those applications. And same with any scripts that you want to run. So, and Windows update rings and so on will follow. A big part of what Augmentt does is obviously our security recommendations that people love. We will be bringing in best practice security recommendations for your Intune configurations. Also, those will come, you know, we always build some stuff in-house. We'll be pulling some from the device secure score, as well as the secure score, just to align the security recommendations. And as we always do, we'll tie them to policies that fulfill those recommendations. So in a nutshell, that's where the product is going. That's how we're going to grow from the Intune perspective. We do so much more, of course. If you want to know, get a full demo of Augmentt, reach out to our sales team. They'll be happy to do a full demo of it. Yeah, there's a question that just popped up, I think, or was it already there? So we said we'd do a demo, and so how does Augmentt help with the Intune baseline? Yeah, so um, I guess I just covered that, but to go in a bit more detail here. So, you know, these are our out-of-box policies that are currently pre-built for your device configurations. You'll see that they touch your Mac and Windows 10 devices. We're building out the iOS components. We'll follow up with the Android MDM components as well. And then similarly, on your compliance side, we have your out-of-box CIS derived compliance templates as well.
And one cool thing I think that we added recently is if you're not using dynamic groups in your environments, it's a very good tool to use. I covered it a little bit, but we have the option now. If you create a dynamic group template, you can actually you create a dynamic group in your environment. You can import it here as a template. So a common one that most people are familiar with is when you first load up Windows or 365, there's an all users dynamic group, but it includes your guest users and external members. So you can create a dynamic group here, maybe just including all your internal members, and then you can have that as a template and then deploy that to your clients, which is great. So you get to specify the rules of a dynamic group and deploy it. That's a huge time save for me. Like when I had managed, I would basically be going to each tenant and recreating dynamic groups, and most of them were the same initial template, and occasionally I had to modify it here and there. But that I found was a huge time save that I'm really happy with the Augmentt having now.
Yeah, that's a good point. It may be adjacent to Intune, but it's heavily used by it. So yeah, that's a great point. So someone just asked how we compare to Enforcer. Those things are better kept in conversations. I think we're not out there to go and say, "Hey, so, we don't want to say any negative things of other products in the space." I think those are conversations best kept individually. Awesome. I think that's it for the questions. No further ones are coming in. Again, we'd be happy to show you the product at any point in time. We will continue this series. I love that you guys asked questions around next things that could come up in the series. Right now, we had this broken into three parts. If more questions come in, and you guys want to extend this to additional parts, we'll be happy to do those as well. So, thank you for the time today. We hope this was super helpful to you guys, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Thanks. Bye.